importantly on the agenda for tonight is to go through the updated version of the vision statement and of the goals. We've made a lot of, I think, great tweaks as a committee, reflecting on all the great comments that we've had as well. I think I want to get through that on the agenda tonight. I think the second part of the evening, again, depending on time, is to start the conversation and discussion around the very preliminary recommendations. And I think we're going to underscore that several times tonight, that this is a very first cut. They're not meant to be final by any means. As we did with the goals, this is just really meant to get the ideas flowing for you as a committee to start to react to. So hopefully the second half or so of the meeting tonight, we'll start to get in that conversation so that we can hear a little bit more about your priorities, your concerns, your wish list items for the recommendations. And I think forecasting ahead, we're already anticipating that we'll have the committee have several weeks to review these in detail, get the feedback back via Kathy, like what we did with the goals last time. So tonight's not the last time that we're going to talk about the recommendations. And then I think closing out the evening, there's some old business, new business that I know Frankie will go through at the end there as well, and start to set our next couple of dates as a committee moving forward. So we have a fair amount of things to update you on in terms of the progress that we've made so far. So I thought, public comment.
Okay, all right.
So Fran, you could supplement that with like public comment, and how you like to address that?
Okay, all right, so at our last meeting, as we had said that we would have a portion of the evening to allow the public to make comments or ask questions. What we thought would be, instead of waiting to the very end, when we are at the point where we've discussed the finalized vision and goals, at that point we would ask for any comments before we actually take that final vote. But as far as the recommendations, since they are in the early stages of draft, that would just be the second half of the meeting, which would be left just to the committee for initial conversation. So sometime after Jeffrey's update, we'll go ahead and ask the audience or people not on the committee if they have any questions or concerns about the goals that we hopefully will be voting on for final vote tonight.
Okay, so I think we can get started and reflect upon a lot of the fun stuff that we've been doing over the last couple months. So John, you want to lead us through some of the updates? And I'm going to grab the lights for everyone.
Great, thank you. I'm a very soft-spoken person, so I apologize. I'm going to be raising my voice and I'm not yelling. So we do want to go through a few things here. We had a few events in the past, beginning with AppleFest in mid-September. We received a number of votes. We had this nice little tent set up. We received a number of comments through Post-it notes. Some of these Post-it notes I just replicated here on the PowerPoint slide. No more strip malls, community teen recreation center. That's something that's been popping up a lot. Community facilities, bike racks, more funding for the senior center, cultural diversity, trails connection, no more banks or gas stations. Concern over stuffing housing onto small lots. That's something that is prevalent as well. Dog park, dog park, dog park. A lot of votes for that. And make Northborough more walkable and bikeable. And related to that, more sidewalks. That we hear a lot as well. We also had the October 4th public forum. So we gathered to discuss the draft vision statement and the goals as we're going to be discussing tonight. There were 34 persons in attendance, so a little bit of low turnout. The first public meeting was 82, but I think there was general consensus that there was a lot of great discussion amongst all of the different groups as pictured here. And we did a little audience polling at the beginning of the session where we tried to understand the demographics. So just a couple of key points. 73% of people had lived in Northborough more than 10 years that showed up to the meeting that night. 58% did not have school-age children, and related to that, 58% were 65 years or older. So the first survey results. So this closed a little bit in September, a little bit a while ago in September, but there's a couple of notes here that I just wanted to bring up, things that have been guiding our process since the survey did close. And some of this stuff will look familiar to you. The survey results are on the public website, on the master plan website. Some of these things were communicated during the first public forum, where we had those nice word clouds in the meeting notes. Lack of downtown vibrancy, traffic congestion, and affordability are the major observed land use issues. obstacles. Vacancies are the predominant land use concern, though density, new development was frequently mentioned. Too much of it, or not well contained. Many commenters agree with constraining new housing to existing residential areas and to match the general nature of existing developments. Many commenters also see the need for more affordable housing options, particularly for seniors. Strong desire to keep expand land for preservation, and numerous requests for additional recreational facilities and amenities. The visual appearance of downtown was a common concern, and there's a common belief that property taxes are too high. Many requests for sidewalks, crosswalks, and for pedestrian safety and walkability, as well as roadway improvements. So, themes that are flowing from one public event to the next public event. So here are the first survey results. Just a couple of quotes that I pulled out here. Hopefully you guys can see this. Increase and preserve open space. We need more pickleball courts in town. Current infrastructure is not sufficient. We are developing what little land we have left. Increase in duplexes, which is going to increase traffic and overcrowding in schools is a concern. Dog park again. On sustainable growth, only big mansions being built, nothing more moderate. Encourage, I think there was another one. Keep big trucks off scenic back roads, no more multifamily housing and developments. So protect our farms. So a lot of the same themes that we've been seeing from survey to survey. So the second survey results, 215 total responses. Now, if you recall, the second survey was based on the draft vision statement and the goals. We put out the draft vision statement and the goals as we presented to you the last time, as they were presented to the public during the October 4th meeting. We wanted to get consensus on them. We wanted to see what people's thoughts were, whether or not the vision statement truly represented the vision and the forward-looking nature of Northborough, whether or not the goals properly supported that vision statement, or if the populace even agreed with the goals, or if there was missing goals. But average level of agreement for the vision statement was 92.1%. So anybody that chose you were neutral to the growth goal and to the vision statement, or agree with the vision statement, or strongly agree with the vision statement, 92.1% of people had those responses. With regard to the individual goals, the average level of agreement was about 93.1%. So among all of the goals, 93.1% of people chose neutral to strongly agree. Land use, 92.2%. Housing, 87.1%. That was the lowest level of agreement among all of the master plan elements. Economic development was 91%, and then everything after that was about 95% or higher.
So we thought that was just kind of telling. That's what we like about doing these surveys in terms of getting the broader pulse. There's about 250 people that responded to the survey. As a reminder, we had it posted right before Apple Fest and ran it through the second public meeting as well. So in addition to what we heard at the public meeting and at Apple Fest, it just confirmed a couple of those things. So as you're thinking about the vision statement and goals tonight as a committee, it was just interesting to get that poll and that feedback as well as some of the individual comments as well.
Yeah, and some of the individual comments summarized are in this document that you have in front of you. This is the track change version of the vision statement and the draft goals. This is the revised vision statement and revised goals with all of the rationale, along with each of the individual response rates in terms of how well the general populace agreed with an individual goal. So you guys have this in hand. If you guys want to go over it, I have it up here on the screen as well. I highlighted all of the major changes that were made to the vision statement and to the goals. But generally speaking, here in the vision statement, there weren't too many changes. There was some concern about the vision statement not representing all ages. There was some concern about the vision statement not being truly representative of the diverse population. There was emphasis that people wanted emphasis to be placed on cultural spaces. There was another, during the public meeting, I think all of the individual tables, plus a number of comments on the survey, wanted to see education represented in the vision statement. So we added a segment there. And then with regard to where economic activity, that was previously where increased economic activity was previously there. So we just removed the word increased, so it's just where economic activity period. And And that's it. Those were the changes to the vision statements.
So what we thought we'd do in terms of the update is go through each of those chapters like we did last time, focusing on the words that are in yellow up here and giving you the update on them. So maybe we pause just for a second now for the committee in case there's anything about the vision statement, because if there's not, we're planning to go through each of the land use, transportation, other chapters, then be able to take a time for the committee to have interaction and response to anything you think needs some tweaking or editing in terms of the goals. So vision statement or comments from the committee or thoughts? Or...
Norm?
I noticed that in the edits you had, that there was a request to remove the request to remove the one?
Yeah, it's just for the camera.
Okay. Request to remove the thriving downtown, the word downtown, and that's still in there. By keeping it in, it seems to overemphasize that the whole vision and goals is about the downtown. Believe me, I know downtown's critical, I live very close to it, but I'm wondering if that should still be in there.
And that's interesting, because that looks like it was added.
No, the thriving downtown bit, that's still in there, but there's a point of discussion whether or not we want to remove thriving downtown and just say thriving town. Or something similar.
I think the question is balancing, at this point, our perspective on how we can move on the downtown. The fact of the matter is, there seemed to be continual comment from the people who participated, either in the surveys or attending the meetings, that wanted to do something about revising, making the downtown more attractive, more walkable, kept coming up and up. So the question is, should the vision encapsulate what we've heard repeatedly from the community, or should the vision kind of manage ongoing expectations of what we think we can actually accomplish, going forward? I think from the very beginning we talked about trying to balance this whole area of downtown. So I can see by including it in there, it accurately represents what we heard from those people in town who gave us input. But once again, as we've said, the question is, what can we do and how fast can we do it? And, what's possible here. So I think we just have to balance those two things. My sense still is, I think it's a little bit dangerous having it in there, but I think if a lot of people feel that the vision ought to represent what we heard, I wouldn't oppose leaving it in, but my gut tells me, that it does overemphasize it in the vision statement, as you said.
So one thing that strikes me about the way that the text is structured with respect to the thriving downtown is that everything that follows is really related physically to what could happen in the downtown zone and less so in other parts of the town. So I think if you're just taking that out, we don't have a lot of other places where we're going to have walkability and connectivity between open spaces, gathering places. Some of those we do have, but commercial activity. So I do think we should leave it. I think it is something that comes up with anyone that is talking about, the sort of state of Northborough. But if we were to take it out, I think we have to rework, the rest of the phrases that relate to that.
Right, and I have to say, I think we actually even spoke about not even sure how big downtown really should be, right? We had talked about the idea that it should be more than what it is, and leaving it in there would indicate that that's really a goal of ours to expand on and improve it. Anyone else have any comments, Kathy?
If I could, to me, by saying that people are drawn to a thriving downtown, to me indicates that we have a current thriving downtown. And a lot of the survey responses seem to me that people are hoping for a thriving downtown. That this master plan, even though it's not a downtown plan, but that this master plan will provide the town with some goals and recommendations about how to make our downtown thrive.
But it states envisions a future where people are drawn to a thriving downtown. So the implication is that it's a future state.
Is that it is a vision.
It's a future state.
Yeah.
The only argument I would make to Fran's point is there are other commercial centers, and we've had this discussion before, but clearly, what did everybody, what was the big word on all the word, graphs that we saw? It was downtown. If you interview people, what does that mean? It means right over here, right? So I'm inclined to leave it as is. The only thing, I'm not trying to add words to the vision statement because I know we've tried to take them out. Is it drawn to a thriving downtown, comma, and other commercial areas, other key areas of town, or something that sort of broadens that there's opportunity in these other areas as well to consider these factors: walkability, connectivity, gathering places, commercial activity, neighborhoods. So, that's just my 2 cents.
It might just be punctuation.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could turn it around to say drawn to a downtown that provides walkability and connectivity between open spaces, gathering places, commercial activity, and neighborhoods, including the downtown. So it's like adding the downtown as one of those places that we want that to happen, as an example.
Or just, why not, putting a period after neighborhood, right? Envisions a future where residents and visitors of all ages and backgrounds are drawn to a thriving downtown that provides walkability, connectivity between open space, gathering space, commercial activity, and neighborhoods, period. Where Northborough's not, because then it separates, it's a different thought, right? The first piece is about what we envision our downtown, but the rest of the town, we want Northborough's natural and cultural spaces, recreational, and everything else to be preserved and everything.
Yeah.
It's just punctuation,
Yeah.
separating the two thoughts.
Works for me.
Tom?
Do we really want to say a thriving downtown is one of our goals, or should it be the means to another goal? And I sent out a letter earlier in the month regarding the sustainable, resilient goals. And I think if that were promoted to the top of the statement, that is what we're after, something that is sustainable and resilient, and having a thriving downtown, walkability, et cetera, are all means to achieving that type of community.
So what would you recommend?
Yeah. Tom?
Sorry.
As far as recommending, so in other words, what you're saying is our vision statement should be about sustainability, not about the pieces that.
Yeah, I think that would help unify all these 7 areas of what we want to pursue. If you say you want to envision a sustainable, resilient community where, et cetera, it's an adjustment in the focus.
Yeah.
And then it would help channel all our efforts in the various 7 categories toward that one goal.
So we say, where residents of visitors of all ages and background are drawn to a sustainable and resilient community
No,
that.
resilient and sustainable comes before that.
Yeah,
It goes right.
up near
Envisions
future.
a future that is resilient and sustainable
Where,
residents and visitors of all ages,
right.
right? Yeah, so instead of just envision the future, what kind of future? Sustainable? Yeah.
I guess what I was really just looking for is changing the word downtown to town. Have a thriving town. That was where I was coming from.
Okay. Well, that's on the table too, changing downtown to town or community, and emphasizing the fact that if, we don't do something about climate change or green energy and all that others, none of this is going to matter, we're not walking anywhere.
I do feel that sustainability is important. I'm not sure I believe it's the overarching theme of the vision for this town. So, and I do, again, respecting the feedback we've gotten, think the word downtown needs to be in the document. So if we want to have it say thriving town, to your point, Fran, and at the end of it say, you know, comma, include after neighborhoods, including, you know, a vibrant, some other word, some other qualifier, downtown, and then, to your point, period, where, and then the rest of the statement.
Does anybody else have any comments about it? Do you want to just parse it out and just like start with, just by a show of hands, do you want to leave it downtown? Do you want the thriving downtown to be a focus, but separating it from, or ending the period after neighborhoods? Do people feel strongly about that? Do they want to leave it that way?
Just one other comment. I think the goals specifically call out a lot of these things we're talking about. So in an effort to make the visual more general and broad, you know, changing downtown to town, and following that on with specific goals in the different sections are going to talk about the downtown, I think kind of addresses that. It's not like the downtown is going to be forgotten. And it sort of softens a little bit, you know, the vision to more of a town-wide type of thing, once the goals handle.
Yeah, it is the second land use goal, right? Yeah.
So
I
if we change,
can work with that.
so if we change downtown to town, now the question is, to Tom's point, you know, I think there's some merit in what he said about elevating sustainable and resilient.
What do we have?
For goal.
And then the more sustainable and resilient communities at the bottom. So it is there. I mean, it's not the focus, but keeping in mind Tom's comments that in all of our recommendations and actions, we have to think about whether or not they are sustainable or resilient. Okay. Jason?
I was just going to say that we have this difficulty with the vision statement of trying to figure out what to put into it, but also how to order it. And I think we just have to accept that they're all important issues, and there's not going to be a perfect way probably to be able to rank order them in terms of presenting them here. So I'm more satisfied that we're covering the bases of the things that we want to talk about, and a little less concerned about precisely, you know, what's first, what's second, and everything. So.
Well, I mean, if somebody, I mean, if we follow, if somebody wants to make a motion and read it as they believe people are interested, and then we'll take a vote. Right? Because it's the vision statement, it's not the nuts and bolts, but it's the overarching vision.
So I think the only two changes we talked about is changing downtown to town. We talked about putting a period after neighborhoods. Whatever the right word is to start that next sentence.
Right. Which is less important if you remove the down from downtown.
You know, if you do that, you just change it, you just pull it down, just leave the rest of it the same.
Second.
The only change.
Second. Is that a motion?
Yeah. All right, so leaving the vision statement as is, with sustainable and resilient community at the bottom, knowing that we're going to focus our goals and recommendations on all of the pieces of the vision statement, and changing our drawn to a thriving town. Any other comments or concerns? Oh, yeah, George. So, okay.
I only question the word community, where it says where community education is valued. I guess I'm thinking specifically school education, and probably for at least a third of the people who are sitting here, you moved to Northbrook because you heard they have great schools. Community education seems to be educating people of all ages, and I think we really need to emphasize the schools, and I'm not sure that emphasizes the schools.
Would you drop the word community?
I would not really.
Okay. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Okay. If there are no other comments, I'd like to see if we will vote on the vision statement as a thriving town with education, with community and down, stricken from the vision.
Second.
So it's going to say Northborough, New England town incorporated 1766, envisioned a future where residents and visitors of all ages and backgrounds are joined to a thriving town that provides walkability and connectivity between open spaces, gathering places, commercial activity in neighborhoods, for Northborough's natural and cultural spaces, recreational amenities, and historic sites to preserve and integrate into the community, to welcome, educate, and inspire, where balanced housing stock supports longstanding residents and new arrivals alike, where education is valued and fostered, where economic activity is given an appropriate place to grow and support our community and residents, and where future environmental and fiscal changes are given consideration and planning for a more sustainable and resilient community.
Okay. All those in favor? Okay. Opposed? Okay, all right, well, thank you. Okay, all right, moving on. Now we go on to the goals. Now, on the piece of paper that you have with all the purple boxes, those are the draft goals and the comments that were made along the way and how they were adjusted as we worked through our comments that we gave to the consultants, the feedback that they received from other people. And then when you see the other one that's in orange, said revised goals and draft recommendations, those are those same goals without all the detail as to how they got there. Okay, so whichever one is easier for you to reference, we're going to talk though only about the goals. So if you use the one that has the orange heading, try not to focus on the recommendations because those are in first round draft. We're really looking at just the goals. Okay.
And so what we thought we'd do for this, my guess would be that there might be specific comments to specific goals as a committee. So we thought we might go through this relatively quickly with just what the updates are, same exact format, they're all in yellow what the updates are, and then come back and you as a committee can talk about which ones you'd like to do, and maybe we can go from top to bottom in terms of any edits that people would like to raise as we go through it. So maybe we'll go through them relatively quickly then.
So the first one, prioritize preservation of valuable natural and open spaces while still accommodating the social and economic needs of the community. There was concern that natural and open spaces could be interpreted to be weed plots. So I added the word valuable. That's also a for interpretation, but it's a little stronger. The second one, enhance downtown by promoting a pleasing and welcoming appearance, one that promotes a sense of place, and enabling it to become the community's proud central gathering area for residents and visitors alike. Ensure Northborough's future land uses support its vision and established community character. There was a little bit of confusion around this one, so we simplified the language and we made it a little bit more direct.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm not sure what I'm looking at. I know what this one is. Now I have two sitting in front of me that both say revised goals and draft
So-
recommendations.
All right, so one of the ones that has an orange heading, I'm sorry for anyone that's colorblind, the one that is orange heading and also has some purple,
Yeah.
that's from Amy, who could not make it tonight. Those are her wanting to get to the head of the class and putting hers all in writing. So we will know if you cut and paste when it's your turn. So, I'm sorry, so yeah, so the original one was the one that we're going to be working off of tonight, that have the goals as edited, and we will then tweak tonight. The other one that is the orange revised goals and draft recommendations with purple comments, those are Amy's comments.
All right. I think I got it.
Sorry about that.
And Fran, if I might, if you see the one that has all of the comments down the right side, that are all in purple, those ones are all the very specific track changes, words that got removed, words that got added, and this is what you see up in yellow. Right? So all of the things that got changed on the one with all the column of the purple to the right, those are all the changes that we're reflecting up in the yellow as well. Obviously, they don't show the words that got deleted, but if you want to follow along on this one, that's probably the one that sees the most edits.
Okay, all set?
Thank you.
Thanks, Norm. Good night.
And the last land use goal, develop land use strategies that support and manage commercial development outside of the downtown, particularly along Route 20 and Route 9, considering adjacent land use compatibility and the town's preservation priorities. So there's a little bit of concern that we were focusing too much on Route 20 and Route 9 instead of some of the other commercial areas in town. Housing, there was a couple of points for conversation. The big picture question for H1, how to balance housing affordability with the notion of new housing development should be limited and constrained in terms of housing types. And we can get into this conversation during the recommendations because a couple of the recommendations talk about housing options, but for the sake of housing one, is there anything that we need to change about this? There was some concern about having explicitly in this goal, the last portion of it, which is ... and ensure that at least 10% of the town's housing inventory continues to be deemed affordable under the state guidelines. I think Ricky could speak to this a little bit more, but a few people thought that was unnecessary and thought that if it is under the state guidelines that we shouldn't be including it, but there's a little bit more to it.
There's some of the comments I heard about there, where some people assume that it's a state law, we have to do it, so it shouldn't be in it. The fact of the matter is, it's not mandated by state law. It's just an incentive for towns to get to 10% so that developers can't come in at this Chapter 40B provision and do large-scale residential development that has a limited amount of affordable housing. And if you're not at 10%, you're subject to that kind of development. If you're at 10% or more, you're not. So it's not that it's required by law to be at 10%. There are many towns in the Commonwealth that are not at 10%. It's just that here in Northborough, we've tried to get to 10%. We've been able to achieve that. And it's important that we, if for no other reason, we develop a certain amount of affordable housing to offset the amount of market rate housing we continue to build so that we're not subject to large-scale commercial residential developments going forward. So, you know, I came out strongly that I think that needs to stay in there. We talked about, at the state level, some of the housing groups that manage affordable housing, they talk about the big A and the little A. Basically, the big A being developing affordable housing to get to 10%, and the little A being doing it because there's actual need for it, that there's an altruistic reason to help people out afford housing. They're all different income and age and levels. That's the little A. The large A is trying to get to 10%. And I think it's important in our vision we address the large A. Whereas we talk about in our housing corporation, the practical version of affordable housing, the altruistic version of affordable housing. We're hopeful we can do both in the county.
Great. And then for H2, there were no changes that were made, but there was a request to change accommodate future growth with accommodate restricted future growth. So that's something that we should be talking about as well. For the third one, pursue a housing development strategy that balances demand with the town's capacity to provide services and infrastructure. Those changes were simply made to be make the goal a little bit clearer with its intent.
So, I'm sorry, Don, just for clarification, are you saying in H2 there were comments that we should add the word restricted future growth?
Yes, so promote housing types that accommodate restricted future growth in the community while maintaining and enhancing the existing character of residential neighborhoods.
So I guess the point is, there was no change made, but that was a comment that was made. Just want to make sure people understood the comment.
Yep.
I think H3 is going to be the key one as we talk about later on actions, this idea of balances demand and capacity. And capacity is a lot of different sort of parts of capacity as far as, you know, schools, but also, you know, water and sewer and impact on the tax rate and a whole bunch of things. So we're going to have some work ahead of us because I think if we do the actions properly, we can address a lot of concerns about growth underneath goal H3. Yeah. Manage. Yeah.
For economic development, define downtown, the downtown business district, in terms of its geography, appearance, branding, and function. So a lot of comments, as you probably saw in one of the previous slides, talk about downtown's appearance. That's popped up here and there. And then the word define was just placed in there to, for again, clarity. There was a big picture question about downtown. Does this goal and does the related goal under land use assume that downtown is currently where it sits? Or does downtown shift a little bit? Does downtown exist as it is bisected by Route 20? Or does it shift north, for example, to the west of the rail line? As Route 20 is more of a gateway than it is the actual downtown. This is something that's been popping up, and we talked about it way back when, first few steering committee meetings. So we want to have that conversation. I guess the actions that we propose are going to guide that. ED2, promote creative redevelopment opportunities for underperforming commercial and industrial spaces. Again, simplified language, and commenters also thought the language demonstrated government overreach, and this was edited to be more within the scope of town control. ED3, no changes were made. ED4, no changes were made, but several commenters took issue with attract more visitors, quote unquote. So we want to know if attracting more visitors is something that we want to keep in the goal, or we want to take that out and revise it in some form of fashion. Natural, cultural, and historic resources. The first one, preserve and enhance the important natural landscapes of the community, including farmlands. So this was a direct suggestion that was made that I incorporated. Commenters also generally associated this with white cliffs, just as an aside, and cautioned against overdoing this. For the second one, where economically feasible, maintain and expand the protection of Northborough's historic resources, including buildings, structures, landscapes, and documents. For the third one, repurpose surplus town-owned buildings and facilities for community needs. Commenters wanted this to be a little bit more specific, to include functional properties and to be more direct.
I think the word surplus was also added right in. There was a comment that we're not talking about going after every piece of town-owned property, but some of these older, unused, or underutilized buildings could be candidates.
And the fourth one remains unchanged. For open space and recreation, there were a few additions in terms of clarifying some language. So what active recreation means, what passive recreation means, and that's with regard to open space and rec goal 1 and 2. So maintain and expand opportunities for active recreation, activities demanding considerable exertion and often requiring significant infrastructure such as baseball and soccer, to residents of all ages and abilities. And the second one, continue to create and maintain passive recreation opportunities, activities demanding little exertion such as walking and hiking throughout the town. So the question is it appropriate, are the goals an appropriate place to put definitions like these? Do these definitions need to be revised, shortened a little bit, perhaps? The third one, promote public awareness and increased use of the recreational opportunities within the community. And I think this one was just a user suggestion that the recreation opportunities within the community were being utilized, but we want to just increase that. For the fourth goal, better link existing open spaces and use such linkages to connect community assets and create a more multiple community. So this was just rephrased for clarity. There was a lot of confusion about what this one meant. For public facilities and service goals, not too many changes. The first one, develop plans and responsible funding to improve key public facilities and infrastructure to support town's operations and to meet the community's current and future needs. The idea here was that there was a lot of concern about runaway expenditures for public facilities, and there was one way of bringing that in a little bit through language. For the second one, ensure public safety departments have the capital assets and the staffing necessary to meet the protection needs of the community today and tomorrow. So there was a need about, a concern about, this previously said, ensure public safety officials. This was broadened to departments to have a little bit more accountability. And then meet the protection needs of the future. So again, it was just sort of reining it in terms of what expenditures would be provided. And the third one, incorporate sustainable development and renewable energy into municipal buildings and amenities where feasible. So this was softening the language a little bit. There was some concern again about runaway expenditures, how much things cost. So this was added, but it certainly does soften the goal a little bit. For the fourth one, continue to support and provide providing an excellent educational system. So there was a little bit of concern during the public meeting and in the comments that we received that this particular goal focused a little bit too much on the public education system and not enough on all ages, education for all ages. So this was broadened a little bit. And then there were no changes to public displays and services goal number 5.
Just on that, go back to that. Number 4, I mean, there's something about the grammar or the wording of that doesn't make sense. You support and provide. It's got to be.
Yeah, you're right.
It used to say invest.
To provide support for it, something like that. I mean, the wording's going to be
Support that we've been providing, yeah.
Is that, oh, sorry, you can't see my edits on the screen. Continue to support an excellent educational system.
Okay.
That we're in providing.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, and transportation, there weren't many changes at all, just one. That was with regard to, instead of adjacent communities, it's now neighboring communities. One discussion point I missed on the school goal is one commenter did note that we should be obtaining input from the school community. I think that's a good idea. Need to balance the importance of the school system with what is and what is not within the scope of the master plan. So just a side note, doesn't change the goal necessarily, but
So I think that obviously concludes the updates to the goals. And I think at this point, we're anticipating that we can go back up to the beginning if the committee wanted to conceptually go through, answer, or talk about any specific changes. We can obviously note those and have a dialogue with the intent of, after this dialogue, looking for either some community input as well as taking a vote on the goals as they exist right now. So we're looking for any changes or tweaks to any of the above. Maybe we start with the top and work our way through.
Okay, yeah, all right, so starting with the land uses, some of it is, some of the changes don't substantively change the goals, right? Does anybody have any concerns about the language that's in there? And I don't want to restrict conversation or deliberation about these, but I do also want to be mindful that we have like 8 sections that we're going to try to get through, so we'll see if we can't come to a consensus more easily. Okay. Does anybody have anything that jumps out at them as a concern, or doesn't hit the mark, or feels that they didn't change that much and that they're comfortable saying these are our goals as written?
I'm not sure I have alternative language to suggest, but goal 4 at least suggests to the reader that there are no existing land use strategies to do that. And I don't know if that's a fair characterization of relatively recent changes to the zoning bylaw and the like.
It could be develop additional land use strategies, something as simple as recognizing that there are some that exist, for example.
we could take a tack that we've taken with other ones and cut it off at strike develop land use strategies and just say continue to support and manage commercial development outside of downtown.
Okay. People feel all right with that? Instead of develop land use strategies that support, just have, what did you do again?
Continue to support and manage commercial development outside of downtown.
That's fine.
Okay, everybody okay with that?
The only question I had goes back to that silly word again, downtown. Earlier you mentioned there was some confusion of where the town center is. Should we be using a better terminology, like it's the old town center or something like that, so it's not confused with what's going on down East Main Street, down the west part of town? I don't know. Should we nip this in the bud now, or?
That was going to be my point. I think we should have a conversation about that because it is prevalent throughout baseline analysis, and it is prevalent throughout all of these goals, and it is prevalent throughout the language of the recommendations. And again, people are a little bit confused about what downtown is, but like you said earlier, downtown, and it was center as sort of the reference language that we use.
My sense is that this is a good place to use the term downtown, and that we get into talking about the actions under that goal. Maybe one of them is better definition of what that is. You know, that we get into that discussion among ourselves, and then we put some ideas out for the community to think about different options for that. But I think as far as just the goal itself, referencing the downtown here, it starts to bring out in the higher level part of the plan, you know, the fact that there was a lot of interest in that topic. But my sense would be, let's wait till we talk about the specific action items underneath that goal, and that could be one of them.
Yeah, agreed, but we've already got defined downtown.
That's an
Parents' grant.
economic.
Under economic development.
Right.
So my joke was going to be, we'll just make sure we do ED1 before we get to this. So again, again, not getting too hung up on order, I would argue, yes, it's meaningful to say downtown here, again, thinking about what everybody was talking about. And then we've already defined an entire goal regarding it. So I'm not sure what else is needed.
Except for, there's more to downtown than economic development. So that's why, so I think that.
In terms of geography, what are we speaking about? We're speaking about geography. So it's already here. I'm
Right.
comfortable with that.
Right. In land use, I don't think in this part, I don't think we need to define the geographic area, but once we get into, to Rick's point, the actions, we're going to have to, right? But maybe that's a whole topic on its own.
Yeah, and that's what ED1 is. Yeah.
And related to that, there will be actions underneath all of them, and those
Right.
actions will be prioritized. So if, there's if defining the actual geography is a priority, then that'll naturally rise above, any
Yeah.
actions related to LD.
Obviously, if this were a project plan, it would be a contingent task before we got to, LU4.
And not to complicate things, but just a big, going back to the big picture question about, do we assume that we know where downtown is from the get-go? Do we use the capital D in LU2 to say enhance downtown, which basically states that we're referring to a specific area, or do we say enhance a downtown? Or is that going too far in the other direction?
I took LU2 as what you would define the downtown would be, regardless of where it ended up being. It would be a place, sense of place where it became the central gathering place.
Okay.
But you don't know where it's going to be.
So I think, building off of all the conversation, one of the recommendations under land use 2 could say something, working in conjunction with the economic development recommendations, define the downtown and make it this welcoming place. So you're actually bridging the two together. And it's very common in the implementation chapter that will be cross references to other action recommendations throughout the plan. So you're working with this one in conjunction with a few others.
Okay. Jason?
Yeah, I was wondering what was bothering me about this, and I think I know what it is. It's the fact that downtown is capitalized here, and if it's capitalized, to me, that suggests that there's a very, specific and well-defined area that refers to. And if we don't have that definition, then the capitalization here, I think, to me, is a little bit confusing or misleading or something. I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but
In both 2 and 4, because to Mark's point, in 2,
Yeah.
we're saying it doesn't matter where it is, it's a feeling.
right, and I don't disagree with that. I guess for somebody walking into this document and seeing the references, I think there are maybe several things, and we talked about them with some of the active and passive recreation, where you have to kind of go out of your way to put a definition next to it because some people might not understand what that really refers to. And I guess I just wonder how many of those kinds of things we have in this document or in this description, whether there's a need to be either define what it is or explain that there isn't a very precise definition at this time.
Although I think, for me, the phrase that we're using, a sense of place, sort of implies that there is an actual geography. So either if we're going to leave it more generic, and not capitalize it, I don't know about that we're trying to create a sense of place in multiple places. Seems a little odd to me. I think that, I know we've discussed this a lot, and I've missed some of this discussion, but to me, downtown is a very sort of specific piece of the town that people refer to. It's a little bit different than a town center in my mind, because a town center, I think, could almost be all of Route 20 in some ways. But I think it's really important for us to continue to articulate what's happening in the center of town. I think that is something that we all keep hearing about, and I don't think it's problematic to label it as such and focus on it. But
So does that mean you're in favor of the uppercase or the lowercase d?
I'm in favor of the uppercase, because it's a specific place where we can create a sense of place.
Okay,
How's that?
perfect. Okay, thank you. Just getting lost.
Yep.
Thank you.
I would assume that close to 100% of the 90-something percent of people who said this is a big deal are talking about
Yes.
that space right in the middle of town there on Route 20,
That's right.
between the library and,
Okay.
so that's what's on people's minds.
Okay, so,
Now, if we're going to propose something else, that's going to be quite a, and not saying we can't someday, it's how we're going to try it, but that's not what people have in mind right now.
okay.
If I can offer as context, what we might be able to do preceding the goals and recommendations in the baseline conditions chapters in land use, we can say that, of all the different land uses and things going on town-wide, the downtown would benefit from better definition in terms of what is the downtown proper, and as such, you'll see in the goals, if they make reference to it, one of the early action items will be better focusing on where that is as it applies to the following goals. So we can introduce a little bit of language in front that recognizes that that needs to be defined before you read through all the goals.
Anyone else? Tom?
I'm certainly in favor of enhancing that downtown area because it's full of aesthetic pollution. But I don't think it's realistic for the amount of investment to try to turn that sow's ear into something else. I mean, it's a state highway. There aren't any public open spaces down there. And the remaining buildings that are there are generally not worth preserving. So you're talking about reconstructing that area when all the lifeblood is going to Wegmans or Apex or other financial centers. So I'd love to see it happen. I lived in a town that had all these characteristics in upstate New York, and to achieve that, to get to that, I just don't think it's realistic.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, but I think at this point, the plan is going to address it in one way or another. The town's going to wrestle into the ground and get people either off this kick or willing at some town meeting to approve some warrant articles to spend some incredible amount of money to do something down there. But, it's coming up and up and up, and so I think the plan should at least make it apparent. Whether it's doable or not, that'll be left with people to figure out. We just need to give some ideas about what to do next and then see what the town decides to do.
Okay. So what I would like to do is, so that I do piecemeal approach, before we go on to the next section, the land use, I'm going to ask if anybody in the audience has any specific questions relating to this, so that we can hear from them, digest it, and then vote on these goals before we go on to the next ones. Otherwise, I'm going to get lost in everything. So we're going to ask, does anyone in the audience have anything specific that they have concerns or questions about these land uses? If you do, I have to get you a microphone so the camera can hear you, and I'm going to ask you to state your name and your address for the record. So Dave, could you just... There you go. Thank you so much.
Okay. My name is Henry Scolani, 72 Crestwood Drive. I've sat here and I heard a lot of things about visions and so forth. If I could go back to the vision, you have a thriving town. What about an appealing town? That's what your goal is here. The word appealing instead of thriving gives me a better feeling for what the town's going to be. You also had something, and maybe it comes later, how you're going to help struggling businesses. You can only do that with tax benefits to them. Okay. Okay, on the land use, and I think you have land use and you have building use there too? Okay. You have the White Cliffs, which is a building, but also a lot of land. Are you addressing that at all for future land use?
That's in the historic preservation section.
Well, someday, if that doesn't get used for historic preservation, if I remember right, after, I think it's 5 years, the town can sell that property, if I remember right. In most towns, downtown is defined by where the town hall is, not where a drugstore or a liquor store, but where the downtown is. So you're struggling over where downtown is. Maybe the de facto downtown is where the town hall is. Or if you move it back into the old town hall, that would be the center of town again.
And I think that's what you heard from the committee.
I heard that, and that's, that's my comment so far.
Okay, good. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Does anyone else have anything on the land use? Okay, well, thank you very much. All right, if anyone doesn't have any other concerns or questions with the view, I don't think we actually made any actual changes other than to LU4 where we took out develop. People feel that, remember, these are the overarching goals. It's not how we get there. This is the goal, or the goal.
I just wonder if this discussion on downtown, and I don't want to beat this meeting too much more than it deserves to be beat, but would suggest, to Rick's point, a separate goal to address a certain geographic area, but leave LU2 and take out the term downtown and call it a place. And they may be the same, but they may not be. But I think we're squeezing two different things into the intersection of two state highways. And that's not going to lend itself to good recommendations that are going to work their way through if that's what we've defined right now in our minds as what constitutes downtown.
And I think that was what Tom was saying pretty much as well.
Right.
Okay, well, I don't want to jump forward, but we do talk about in economic development, defining downtown, right, under economic development. So it would be there. So taking it out of LU2, just saying that it could end up being the downtown, but it could end up being the White Cliffs. It could end up being, God forbid, Wegmans.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So there are a variety of gathering places in town. This is looking for the implication of downtown, the discussion of people in town is a central commercial area that's enhanced and more vibrant. And I respect what Tom's saying about, the Southsier, but, all I can think about is Reddit, a town that I've not spent a lot of time going through until the recent experience with commuting and going through that area. Intersection of a couple roadways, maybe not to the scale of a Route 20, but very vibrant, restaurants and activity there. We've had failed restaurants downtown. I think the potential is there. I think that's what people are speaking to when they mention downtown. So again, I would just reiterate, we've already got an economic development goal to define it. So I don't see a problem with leaving downtown as stated. And, we should pop the word graph back up because, downtown causes all the others to shrink by comparison.
All right, so, Norm.
Is this as simple as? The way we have it set up right now, when we do the revised goal, when we do the goals, it starts with land use, and then it goes on to the other topics. Can we just simply move the one that addresses the downtown identification to the front? Instead of being land use as the first topic, move it to the, was it economic development?
Or to Jeffrey's point, reference it,
Just flip them,
yeah.
and I think then it's clearer.
Again, just trying to help further clarify.
Yeah.
So in this implementation chapter, it might say short-term, midterm, long-term, when you should make these recommendations. We would put short-term, identify the downtown as a first action item that relates back to land use goal number 2. And all of the actions that fall underneath it. So we can tie the time sensitivity to it in several ways. Okay. We can do that.
Yeah, there's no presupposition that things would be done in the order that she's
Okay.
presented in the report.
All right.
These are just separate sections of the report.
Well,
We can do them in any order we want.
Okay, so that being said, the only change, from what you see upstairs, the only change would be on LU4, where we're taking out the developing, because we do actually already have some strategies to support manage.
But just repeat what that's going to change to, trying to get a word there.
LU4?
Continue to support and manage commercial development outside of downtown, particularly along Route 20 and 9, considering adjacent land use compatibility and the town's preservation priorities.
All right, so those are our goals for land use.
I make a motion that we accept them, as Donnie just stated, with the one correction.
All right, okay, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move on. We're now into housing. Okay. So the housing did not change much from what we had come up with at our preliminary stage, our discussion, and then the feedback from the second survey and the October 4th meeting. If you just remind us on H3, you're going to just add capacity to provide
Which is a
and
great
demand
thing.
with, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Any concerns, questions from the committee? Jason?
Just quickly, and you may have discussed this when I was absent at a meeting. For H1, I just wonder whether that should be split up into two. One to address the first point, and then the second one to address the 10% inventory level. And I'm not feeling too strongly about it, so if you want to leave it as is, that's fine too.
So continue to maintain and encourage a diversity of housing options to increase housing affordability and choices for all ages. Stop. The next one, to ensure that at least 10% of the town's housing inventory, and have those separate goals.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what comes to mind when I read it, I guess,
Okay.
is whether those
All
are
right.
two related but separate points.
All right. Well, I'm going to defer to Rick and say, is it blended? Are they still separate things? Or,
They really are two separate.
okay.
Basically, the small A followed by the big A, where the altruistic view starting and the practical view finishing. So I don't think it first time together, but I have no. The thing is going to be, we haven't thought about the action. I'm just wondering if the actual action steps we're going to come up with may kind of cross over between the two, and so it may be difficult to split them and have specific action items only for the large A, separate from action items for the small A. It might be better to keep it together so that the action items we develop may cross over between the two.
I guess I wonder if the second part is actually maybe more a recommendation or an action item than it is strictly speaking, a goal.
No, I don't think so. I think we need to keep that in there.
Goal.
To keep A the goal. The more I think about it, I think keeping it together might make it easier to then come up with the steps underneath, because some of the steps might cross over between the two.
And keeping the underlying goal of staying at the 10% of affordable housing is so that we're not subjected to a 40B development is a goal. And it actually benefits the community because we can then manage the affordability housing inventory more easily. Or we actually can control it. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
I agree with Jason that I think it is more like a recommendation underneath that with the 10%. But
10%.
to me, it seems like an action item as opposed to an overarching goal, which I believe is what Jason's point was. So I would tend to agree with that as well. I understand the logic behind it and why we need it and why we want to do it. But to me, it's not necessarily a goal, it's more of a recommendation. That's just my opinion.
Thank you, Susan. Anyone else? Tom?
So in some of the recent planning board and design review meetings, there's been a strong pushback against other housing types besides single-family homes. I know that they feel that duplexes and multifamily threaten the single-family home character of Northborough. And that has come up repeatedly to the effect where we had a one-year moratorium on duplexes. So I think this tension needs to be discussed and resolved in some way. We are now in the process of finishing up the design guidelines for duplexes. And is that much of a help? Those guidelines will be, they're not going to resolve this issue in terms of duplexes. So I'd like to hear more about what people think about multifamily housing. Up until we rewrote the bylaws 6 or 7 years ago, there was no provisions for multifamily or duplexes at all. And we introduced it and allowed 4 in some districts, 8, up to 8 in other districts. And then when the first one that came through, there was a lot of pushback by Tim Shea's project. And it was, at town meeting, was scaled back again. So this push-pull is continuing. And I'm certainly in favor of a variety of housing types. But we need to talk about it.
Okay, and I think I mean, if we agree on H2 as a goal, then we're going to have to talk about it when we get to the action steps. Right?
H2 and H1.
Right, because you can't promote housing types that accommodate, well, the future growth could be dependent on the housing types we promote.
And you can't become sustainable and resilient if you don't get more density and you don't get this variety. So I would certainly encourage that, but I think we need to hear the other side of that.
All right, and do you think that that's more at the action level, or is that something we should have now?
Yeah, I think Fran brings up a really good point, that if you like the idea that you need diversity, you need to take that on as a goal, how you specifically do it and what types and what measures you do, and talk about things like the need to develop guidelines or need to be specific about densities, that stuff can come in an action later, if you agree with the goal. How you specifically do it, I think is the second part.
I would just add to that saying that, you know, in the formation of these goals for housing, we were intensely aware of that push-pull. So we tried to balance, you know, the need for new housing and the need for affordability and what goes along with that in terms of housing types and the variety of housing types, but with that sense of character, with that sense of community, and with that, you know, that understanding that there's a lot of people that don't want to see that go away. Hopefully that has come out, and hopefully, you know, that works for you folks. But you know, of course, open for comment.
Well, I think that would be a lengthy discussion, and I think that it is one that we're going to have when we get to how do we achieve these goals.
I think you'll see as you start to look through some of the recommended first draft action items under there, there's quite a bit of talk about exactly what you're talking about. We're going to have to work our way through.
Okay, all right, so once again, we're going to ask anyone in the audience if they have any questions, concerns, or comments about housing. Okay, there you go. And you don't have to say your name again.
Okay, but now you should know me. Okay, just a couple of things. I thought we settled once and for all the duplex issue when we put a moratorium and then a town meeting voted to have 150-foot frontage. I don't see how this master plan should be planning for duplexes that don't meet that particular criteria.
It is not.
Okay, I wanted to make that clear. And also, you talk about density. We have to increase the density of the population, everything. Doesn't that take away from the type of town that your vision says we need? If you become like a Marlboro, let's say, I don't think that's the type of town we want to become. Thank you.
Any other comments from the people in the audience? Yep, Ben.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Carrie Marnick. I am at 16 Hemlock Drive. I'm also a member of the planning board, so the housing goals and land use goals speak to me quite a bit because I'll be on the side of implementation. In any case, I did want to say, and a little bit echoing what Henry said, is that in terms of what people in the town want, I feel like some of the surveys didn't necessarily draw out, we're not working with the same definition. So when people say affordable, what does that mean? What does small town mean? We can't even decide what downtown means. So I think we need to, and Tom, I agree with what you're saying there about, we need to solve those things because otherwise, I had the benefit of seeing the recommendations that aren't really in sync with a working, we don't all have the same working definition of these terms. And I think we need to get there in order to make this actually be a productive exercise that we can implement on the planning board or ZBA side, or any board really in the town. I noticed that the housing section in the survey had the most amount of trouble, specifically H1. So almost all the other goals had 93% approval, whatever the case. H1 had the lowest at 80%, and that was just neutral to strongly agree. And there seemed to be a lot of disconnect in the feedback about not wanted to put restricted growth or somehow take out growth. Or I noticed the word small town feel was taken out of the land use goals. And I think that when we talk to the residents, we hear the word small town growth. So we can't discount that, and we can't, pretend that, we have to listen to what the residents are saying. And some of these goals, I think, are benign as is, but when we start to go to the recommendations, I would definitely want to see more of agreed upon definitions behind affordability. What do residents want for density? What do they want to see for housing? Where do they want to see it? That type of thing. I think we need to take a real good look at. And then other than that, let me make sure I have everything. I would just say that Amy had sent out some additional comments to everybody, and I hope that you do take the time to read them. I know we're not talking about it in the public section here, but as a fellow planning board member, I would only add to that an exclamation point. I think it's right on, and I would appreciate everyone looking at that. One thing that I did want to say is that she put at the top was when I talked to the residents of Northborough, they like Northborough because of the small town feel. Single family residential, good schools, open space, recreation, a family-friendly community. So I think that as long as our goals get there, that's great. I would just want to be mindful of, always keeping the residents in mind and how they feel about it. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we are at our second section of goals with the housing. We've heard from the committee, we've heard from the residents. Where are we going?
No, I make a motion
Oh,
that we accept these as written.
Second.
Okay, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor? Aye.
So, Chairman, just a point of order on, or just a question on process on this. So, given the comments that were made, given that this is going to require some work in terms of the action items on this, is it possible that we might survey again as we work on a particularly contentious or conflicted section, and as we try to work through definitions? Because to Tom's point, and you showed it in the comments, Donna, no more McMansions, but no density duplex. It's like you can't have your cake and eat it too, and so the public has to recognize that we have to come to some compromise here to making it an affordable town still.
Sure, so I guess a couple things. One, we could do a little more surveying if that's helpful. I think it may or may not be helpful in light of the fact that some of the recommendations might only be able to go as far as saying you need to study this in more detail and you consider that and do a study. So for example, when you're updating a housing production plan, they'll identify specific demand needs in there, and with that comes potential typologies. While we can do a survey now, that might be very counter to what our actual housing need is. So I think we want to look carefully as a committee, what are the next couple of steps the town can take that the steps are going to help you get to where you need to be and not jump too far ahead.
Gotcha.
And things like deciding on a density or zoning or setback, those things are probably way too detailed for a master plan.
Understood.
But saying that you want it to be context sensitive, saying that you want to have the variety in the scale and the character of existing neighborhoods, there's many ways of having a variety of housing at a smaller scale that diversifies who you are today. And we're not talking about big buildings. We're diversifying in an appropriate scale. So I'd ask you, what are the next steps that you're needed to do? And if the survey is part of that, but it might need a little more study than has to happen after this one's done. That's all.
Right, I mean, to Carrie's point, I mean, it's very subjective. I mean, it's from your perspective. I mean, Tom talked about the character of the town that he grew up in. I grew up someplace where there were streetlights and sidewalks, and that's where you played. Now I live in a neighborhood that has no sidewalks or streetlight. So I think this is very small town. Somebody else may think it's a very built-up town. So it's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging to come up with action steps to get to a blend. We are going on to economic development. Okay, so we certainly have decided that we do need to define what we mean by downtown.
Well, I was proposing to strike that.
And, yeah. Any, Mark?
I find the word underperforming as a subjective word, that I don't know how to apply it, so I don't think that's the right term. If what we're trying to get to is sort of the vacant or unused properties, if that's as limited as the goal is meant to be, but if it's actively used commercial industrial properties, I think underperforming is more measured by who the users are than
With
All right,
vacant,
so just
vacant and
Just
underutilized.
strike it.
Or just strike the word
Just strike
altogether.
the word altogether.
Say for commercial property.
Promote creative redevelopment and redevelopment opportunities for commercial industrial properties.
Well, that means as a goal, you're willing to get fully creative in how you're gonna treat your commercial industrial property. And that's a goal. It has consequences.
Well, that's how we got North Road Crossing. We were creative.
Would your sense, Mark, there should be a different adjective instead of underperforming?
I don't think it should be underperforming. It strikes me as very limited if the goal of a master plan is to simply focus on vacant properties. It doesn't seem like it's a big goal. I mean, I could see it supporting creative development of all commercial industrial properties, seeing what the recommendations are.
Or we just strike the word underperforming and then we'll implement the action items as the
How creative.
our detailed.
Do you think that, I'm just curious whether you feel that striking that makes the goal more a statement about unbridled growth than it does about a balanced environment? And that's the only concern I would have, is because promoting creative development and redevelopment to me means stretching the boundaries, thinking outside the box, and I think residents may interpret that as being a much stronger pro-development statement than we maybe intended.
Anyone else? Jason?
I think the original intent of the goal was really to address the subset of commercial industrial properties that seem not to be performing in some sense, or that they're vacant, or they're seemingly not well used or well maintained or something like that, right? So I guess I'd step back and say, what was the original intent of this goal? Is that intent still a goal? And how should it be phrased?
You know that downtown we talked about? I think that's what it was referring to, was, burnt out lot, underutilized old gas station.
Maybe that's a better word, underutilized instead of underperformed.
Well, I don't know, that's what I was just,
Again, is the single-story brick building at the intersection of 135 and 20 with the convenience store in it underutilized or underperformed? You might say yes, the owner might say no.
Right.
It's throwing off net operating income. So, it's more of what you're trying to get to as an economic development.
I'd say underutilized, and I can't judge, it's a functioning business, not like the aesthetics of the building, but that's in some senses irrelevant.
Right.
So I think, certainly vacant. I think you ask people in town, they want to deal with the vacant properties, and I think underutilized probably makes sense as well, just because that gives you a little more room there in terms of how, so to me, the town hall, the new old, what do we call it? The new old town hall, right? Would be an example, I think, of an underutilized.
So if you turn the goal around to work with property to promote creative redevelopment opportunities for underperforming commercial industrial properties, essentially you're requiring the property owner to self-identify as underperforming.
And there's no, by leaving it underperforming, there's no economic development goal for the current performing properties. So if we took underperforming out, couldn't some of our actions be more specific to those that are underperforming or underdeveloped or underutilized, as well as those that are, I mean, right now, St. Cobain is not underperforming or underutilized, but if they decide to pack up and leave town, you'd want to have some type of plan that may be creative in how we reuse it, right? So the action, the recommendations under something without underperforming may be where we address the underperforming and underutilized separately. Anyone else on the committee?
Maybe, John, your concern goes away if we strike the word creative, so it's promote redevelopment or property improvement opportunities for underutilized commercial industrial property.
Works for me.
Promote redevelopment opportunities for underutilized commercial and industrial properties.
I'm taking out the word creative.
And we're changing underperforming to underutilized.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
All right, how do people feel about that? Remove create and.
Well, I think you need to have creative people, like architects.
I think we should be creative. I mean, you can do some really awful redevelopment. I think creative has this positive connotation.
Well, maybe. For
Agreed.
those that are
Agreed.
not for those, and I'm not, I'm in between, right? I have a more balanced view of this. I would say that some people would see, in this town, would see creative as being, do whatever you want. So that's all I'm saying. I'm just giving an honest reaction to the language in that and how I think others might react to it. So I just think, I think what you recommended actually makes a lot of sense to me. I like the underutilized, because underperforming is too sweeping.
Maybe the architects might make some creative action.
Yeah. So I make a motion that it reads, promote, parentheses, development opportunities for underutilized commercial and industrial properties.
Jason?
That was a motion.
So I just want to ask the question whether we're also not only talking about underutilized, but we're also talking about unattractive commercial industrial properties.
That's even more subjective.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's a subjective word, but I wonder if it speaks to the intent of this goal, at least as it was originally phrased. Is it strictly the function of the business, or whether a property is being used to its optimal capacity for business, or are we also talking about the aesthetics of the look of the facility or the lot or whatever? Are we trying to encourage, unattractive properties to?
The appearance and the aesthetics. I agree with Bill. I think the thought process behind this one was, kind of vacant or down.
Yeah.
But I think there's more to it than just vacant. So I think what Mark proposed kind of covers a wider waterfront.
Michelle, did you want to just comment?
And I just want to comment, we don't have a historic district where we can actually say what is aesthetically appealing and not. So I think that's sort of a dangerous avenue to go down, because what I might think is appealing, you might think is unattractive. And I think you can't really get into defining specific requirements for businesses and how they do it unless you have a historical district. We don't have that. We've chosen not to have it. So,
But couldn't creative also, going back to that word, am I incorrect in saying that creative economic development strategies are not a thing? Like the way that we think about financing and working with developers could not be a creative activity? I mean, that's often the real success behind any redevelopment. It's a creative approach to funding.
Well, how about instead of leaving creative and changing opportunities to strategies for underutilized commercial? Is it the same? I mean, I get what you're saying. People are going to think it's carte blanche, that somehow the development can run amok.
I'm merely sharing a reaction that I don't think I'd be alone in having.
Right. Yeah.
So I just, and to me, that was a lot of the feedback we got, was that sense of balance and also avoiding unbridled growth. So that's really the reason I'm putting out there, but it's whatever the committee feels. Again, I think there is a motion on the table.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say that, all right, but we haven't heard a second. So right
I'll
now.
second.
There you go. Okay, there you go. All right, so the economic development goals as they are, by changing ED2 to promote the and development opportunities for underutilized commercial industrial properties. And I apologize, I did not ask if the audience had any questions about the economic development. Okay, just quick one?
Right, just a quick one. Similar to what I said earlier, I agree with this gentleman over here on the underperforming properties. If you don't own it, what are you going to do to force the person to bring it up, or even a building? How are you going to force them, if their buildings meet code, how are you going to force them? The third one, can I go to the third one for a minute? How, I mean, I've been in business, well, I was in business for almost 55 years, and my biggest challenge was to keep my company going as the economic conditions changed. How's the town going to help do that? Just out of curiosity.
Well, you come to our next meeting and help us with those action steps. Thank you very much. Okay. Anyone else?
I had a comment on ED4 because I think, Donnie, you brought that up, that there was a question about visitors, and I'm wondering if it would be helpful to define visitors, if they're like day visitors or overnight, or what exactly we mean by that. But could you repeat what the question was about it?
Yes, so some commenters just took issue with the fact that the goal is stating that Northborough wants to attract more visitors, where they said maybe we shouldn't be attracting more visitors, maybe we don't want to be attracting visitors, we don't want the additional traffic.
So gates at most major roads.
Okay.
Just wanted to be clear.
Okay, did that clear that for you?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's clear. I mean, yeah, I think it's a good idea to attract visitors, but if the general, I don't know if that's a general consensus or just one comment. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was just a comment, yeah.
Okay.
I didn't make the change, but I posted it.
So I would say probably, respectfully, date elements of one. So, today, we have a tremendous number of visitors that come here, and if we do want, to Mark's point, if you want a vibrant business community, you do visitors.
Right.
So,
Right. Okay, so.
Sorry, one point of clarification. So I heard, Mark, you mention promote improvement opportunities over redevelopment opportunities. Was that something that you wanted to push further, or?
No.
Okay, so the motion and second are on the table. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Okay, all right.
do we need to do a motion on all of them? Because I made a motion on ED2. I'm not trying to be.
Oh, no, all right, so by agreement, was that on all the economic development goals?
Yes.
By agreement, thank you, all right.
Including the change that was suggested.
Right, okay, great. All right, so our natural, cultural, and historic resources. Okay, so, anything chomping at the bit on any of these items?
Why was farmlands included? I mean, because landscapes does not include farmlands? I don't.
Yeah, people called that out specifically. They wanted farmlands to be included under this one. And they noted that it's not necessarily part of these. They wanted to be a little bit more specific. They wanted it specifically called out.
So I'll give you, for example, like there's, I think it's over in, Bedford, Lexington, there's Battle Road, and there's the National Park Service that has all the Minuteman Trail and those things. Those are historic landscapes that people can talk about how it was used historically. So whether it's a farmland this being for agriculture or a landscape that has a sort of history and cultural aspect to it and resource or value to it, the landscape broadens the ability to interpret those types of things. That's one example.
Right. Yeah, Mark.
In goal 2, can we restrict it to Northborough's publicly owned historic resources? I wouldn't do that, because CPA funding is used for other resources, such as churches and the Historical Society, and ways of funding other things that are not Northborough properties.
I'm sorry, David, were you able to get that?
What's that?
I wasn't sure if you could hear, sorry.
Well, yeah, I think I'm okay.
Sorry about that.
That's
My concern is having concern historic defined, including buildings and structures. It strikes me that it could be read to go to issues such as design criteria across the board for certain properties that somebody thinks are important to the historic fabric.
Well, to Michelle's point, if we ended up having a historical district, that would be exactly what we would want to do. Right.
Historic districts provide for, in a manner like statute, there's a way to do that if you want to do it. If this goal, therefore this goal suggests us to do something else.
Okay. And I didn't even like where economically viable, I wanted to take that out completely.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of that either.
Yeah.
It actually
That's
doesn't make
suggested.
sense, having where economically viable and then including documents in that, that doesn't grammatically make sense to me.
I mean, the goal is to maintain and expand. How we do that, economic feasibility is part of how we do it.
Right.
But I feel that it's limiting in the goal.
Yeah, because it's not all about, like the Northborough, the historic district, like Norm said, it deals with private homes, so it's not like it's economically viable from our standpoint, it's what the resident wants, so that kind of limits the historic perspective to almost to publicly owned buildings, but it's not, it's broader than that. So I would be in favor of getting rid of that intro.
Yeah, I mean, you could put where economically viable in front of all. I'm
Yeah.
not sure why it doesn't be in front of this one, I would agree that,
Right.
obviously, there's gonna be some action items we're gonna put underneath these things, and talk about what we recommend the town does, and you go through that, the cost is gonna be a factor. I would agree,
Seems like any recommendation in the entire master plan is only contingent on whether or not it's economically viable, so I think you could expand on your point.
Sorry, this one specifically, if you recall, I mentioned that people associated this with Point Place, which is where.
Oh,
It's economically viable, so
all right. So how do people feel about removing where economically viable from number 2?
Makes sense.
Okay, all right.
And to the document thing, I'm assuming that's referring to the fact that the town does have, presumably some, right, probably in Cappy's office, historical documents, right? So, right, is that?
CPA has funded already to have some of the town's historical documents preserved.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and
So
so
it makes
there's an
sense to me.
incentive to do that for more documents in other parts of the town.
Yeah.
The town, the society, and a few other places. It makes good sense, it's actually a really good idea.
So yes, I agree with striking that first portion.
And adding important natural, enhancing important natural landscapes? Does important really need to be there?
Well, that was the weedy lots, right? So it's a natural landscape. I mean, I think, I don't know, it's a big problem
This
with
is
the work.
kind of, I'm not sure we can talk about this, but this is talking about historic things. To the extent you identify historic resources, historic landscapes that we're talking about, not anything, not even landscapes, but
Right.
historic things.
Right.
Well, no, natural cultural and historic. So it is natural landscapes, but, I mean, who decides what's important? Right?
So, NCH2 is about
Ultimately,
historic
the
things.
people of town, right?
Right, no, but so going back to number 1, do people feel that important needs to be in front of natural landscapes? Or should we just should we have a goal of trying to preserve and enhance natural landscapes? You want that small town feeling, you want to see the trees and the aqueduct.
And the smog along property.
Right.
We won't be doing it if it's not important, so I just don't see why the word needs to be there.
Okay, so let's by agreement, so we're going to strike the word important, we're going to strike where economically viable in number 2, and people feel about 3 and 4.
I just have a really nitpicky comment on 4. It should be coordinate efforts among cultural because it's 3 things. Just to believe.
Okay, all right, you get that? All right, okay. All right, so the comment was that because it's 3 things, it's not a between, it's a amongst.
No, just among, right? ST, among.
Right, just among.
Okay, all right. Okay. All right, does anybody else have any concerns about these 4 before we move to see if the, somebody has any answer?
No,
Oh.
do you want to ask?
Oh, yeah, I was going to
Oh,
before, I was
sorry.
saying before I asked the people in the audience. Okay, anything on the natural, cultural, and historic goals? Fabulous, okay, all right.
Move we accept these goals as changes were suggested.
Okay. There is no further discussion, all those in favor? Okay, thank you so much. All right, so on to open space and recreation.
So just in OSR 2, just because I do a lot of passive recreation myself, I would just change the definition that says the meaning little exertion. I would put the meaning less exertion.
Well, I mean, do people feel they need to have the definitions in the goals to begin with?
Yeah, I think.
I thought that was a good idea.
Okay, there you
Whole
go.
IE can come.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
so less exertion?
Less exertion in resources.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Rick. I think that the main difference between the 2 is the infrastructure needed, or it's just a different kind of infrastructure. For goal 1, it's like physical structures. For goal 2, it's paths and trails, which is addressed in the strategies. But yeah, it's not necessarily defined by less exertion.
That's a good point.
Is golf a passive activity?
Yeah.
Depends if you're
Depends
riding
how
or
much
walking.
scoring you do.
All right, so we're leaving the definitions and we're changing the one on number 2 from little to less.
Less exertion in resources.
Less exertion and resources.
So you are leaving it.
Yeah, we're leaving the definitions, yes. Okay.
Less exertion.
And resources,
And resources.
And
as opposed to significant infrastructure. Okay. Promote public awareness and increased use of recreational opportunities? No problem with that? I mean, that's in our goals, maximize.
and then you're keeping considerable exertion in the first one?
Yeah. There's no change in the first one at all. Okay, Jason?
Yeah, for the first 2, would it flow a little bit better to just make that first sentence complete without the parenthetical thing in the middle of it, and instead tack that on as a second sentence, either in parentheses or out of it? The clarification of what's active and what's passive. So that the first one would just read, maintain and expand opportunities for active recreation to residents of all ages and abilities, followed by whatever you need to say about what active recreation is.
Okay, so put the definition at the end
It's,
of the sentence.
this is a form versus content, yeah, like, you know.
Okay.
So.
All right, anything else on open space? Okay, and I don't want to think that people are really just like okay with these and not just tired. Okay, all right.
So we're moving the definition to again as a second sentence?
Yeah,
Essentially,
and
yeah,
we
one and
both,
two.
we both 1 and 2. Okay.
I would want to say something like pickleball. Well, I'm serious, because if you're saying residents of all ages, pickleball is generally played by people 55 and up.
So instead of baseball and soccer, do baseball and pickleball, or soccer? and
Baseball, soccer, and pickleball. If you're gonna be really specific and want all ages to be involved, pickleball is the
Well,
older people.
well, we
If
used to get
you saw
people.
how many people play pickleball in the town hall every week,
Right,
it would be its own goal.
right.
Every day, they're in the town.
All right, well, yeah, then I actually don't have to show examples at all, we can just give the definitions. It all depends on how much ink you have. All right, anyone in the audience have any questions, concerns, or comments about open space and recreation? Yes, sir.
Just a comment, a lot of people over 55 do play pickleball at the town hall. Some of them are up in their 60s and even 70s.
Okay. I'm sad to hear up in their 60s.
But I do think George's point's a good point in terms of representing the range of
okay.
residents, so I
All right, so such as baseball, pickleball, and soccer. And I assume that's that's active recreation, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
and it requires some interest.
there you go, all right.
That's an excursion.
Okay, so do I hear a motion on the open space and recreation goals?
Move to approve the open space and recreation goals
Okay, Jason and George?
as amended.
Okay. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor? All right, good to go. Where are we now? Oh, public facilities, okay. Develop plans and responsible, okay. I think the safety departments versus officials, does make sense. I don't know, how do people feel about responsible? Go ahead, Mark, sorry.
I was going to say that, I would suggest taking out the whole phrase relative to funding.
Okay.
Just say develop plans to improve.
To maintain the public facilities. I think that as a vision, as a goal of the community, you just simply have to have that. You can't qualify it by funding.
Okay. Okay, so removing responsible funding from the first goal.
Yeah, and I think there could be some other, in the recommendation, like I harped on the notion of maybe integrated facilities. I mean, those are things where those would reflect being prudent, right, economically, as we
Right, and our 5-year capital improvement plan, those are all ways in which we're going to be responsible in our funding. Okay. Having departments in number 2, how do people feel about staffing necessary to meet the protection needs of the community today? Protection in, out, just needs, or, because of course that's why we want them.
Would it be services rather than departments?
To ensure public safety departments have the capital assets and staffing necessary.
He's just suggesting changing departments to services.
To ensure public services. Yeah, that's not bad. People feel all right with that, changing that to services from, it was officials, and then it got changed to departments, now we'll change it to services.
What are we talking about?
On number 2.
Police?
it
No,
said-
I know.
Oh, police, police, fire.
Police, fire,
DPW.
DPW, anything else?
Ambulance, part of fire, or separate? Why? Why are we only talking about public safety under public facilities and services?
Maybe we shouldn't be.
Why isn't it all public departments? Public.
Good question. Maybe taking out safety and leaving it departments. True enough. And take out protection too.
Yeah.
And otherwise
Right,
we've
and
left the
then a
DPW
specific
off.
action item under that could be the one related to what we're doing with police, fire, and
Right.
Public safety would certainly be a separate recommendation from community service, from youth and family services.
Right,
Right.
sidewalk maintenance, yeah.
If you take safety out of the department, then you say ensure public departments have the capital assets and staffing necessary to meet the needs of the community.
Yep, Yep. People see where that's going?
Or instead of public use of town, just ensure town departments.
Yep.
Don't wait for everybody to recognize who's going to talk to us.
So is there enough differentiation then between PFS 1 and PFS 2? If you change the focus of PFS 2 to be all public departments?
Well, facilities can be public, but not necessarily town-owned, right? So that's the difference I see between 1 and 2.
I saw one as more the capital asset. Yes. Two is more of the human asset.
Okay.
You have to wait till
All right, so Donna, what do we have for 1 and 2 now?
So are we taking Kathy's suggestion to change public to town, or are we keeping it
I
public?
think that's plain language, yeah.
Town.
So keeping one as is, and then the second one is ensure town departments have.
One I'm taking out, we're taking out any
And responsible
responsible.
for
Oh, yes.
Right, right.
Yes,
It also
to that.
needs to include
Sorry. Ensure town departments have the capital assets and staffing necessary to meet the needs of the community today and tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Number 3, I would take out where feasible, and it's kind of implied.
Well, on number 3, I think it's kind of cavalier to think that we have a choice not to be sustainable in devoting our efforts to renewable energy in light of the recent IPCC report. I mean, time is narrowing where we can effectively do anything, so I just think we need to be a little more aggressive.
Right, definitely take out where feasible,
Correct.
okay?
And then build in a series of steps underneath there that the town should follow sooner or later. And maybe that's another discussion we have as to how to call that out in the introductory section in terms of the order of the prioritization of what we think we need to do when. And we need to build a case for the need to be moving on the items of the PFS3 sooner than later. And we can argue about exactly how specific and how aggressive those action items are going to be.
All right, I'm going to continue to support, we're taking out the right, to continue to support an excellent educational system. We've already taken out the word providing earlier. Okay. And take advantage of and prioritize opportunities to improve downtown public space. Do we need that again in public facilities and services? I mean, why is that? That's not a public facility. I mean, we do own land down there, but those are
So
key
that,
public facilities and infrastructure.
right, so that would include things like your sidewalks, your streetscape, the town common, be able to maintain and operate those critical parts of your open space, your downtown open space. Things like,
Then why is it in public facilities and not in natural?
Because they're public, because they are public facilities.
Okay, but so what about the sidewalks throughout the rest of the town? How are they prioritized? They're all part of, there's number 1, right? Making sure we have funding to improve key public facilities and infrastructure. Isn't downtown one of our key public facilities and infrastructure?
right, I think the subtle difference is between like open space and natural type of spaces versus having downtown that might have a different type of purpose to it as a public facility. All of them are public facilities, but there's a more natural side versus the downtown side of things. They could be either. I don't think it makes much of a difference, but recognizing with everything people have been talking about the downtown and with its public spaces as well, like, that's probably an important thing to get the maintenance of it right, the operation of it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what action or recommendations would be different in one that I wouldn't just be copying and pasting into 5.
Sure.
Kathy?
No, well, I was just gonna say, I think 5 originally came when you all first discussed the goals to begin with, that 5 was one of the ways to distinguish the downtown from the rest of the community. That, you know, again, the focus was, or the reminder to people that this isn't the downtown plan, but yet we hear you loud and clear that downtown is a key component.
Yeah, they could be combined together with an action that's specifically linked it, or they could be separate, but I think it's one of those, there's no right or wrong. I don't think. But I think that was right, it was based on the need to like call attention to it.
Anybody else have any concerns, questions? Leave it, no, do just let it go?
I think I'm going to leave it.
Okay. All right. Well, somebody pass it on the candy dish. Okay, all right, I'm going to ask if anyone out there has any questions or concerns or comments about our public facilities. That's fine, okay, I just had to turn around to read it, I wasn't.
So just in terms of, actually I have a question. Did protection come out of PFS 2 altogether? Yes. So there's protection not anywhere in the plan? I mean, I just think to some extent, as we're building, we may want to consider, I don't know, is that important to mention at some level? Maybe a recommendation, it comes in as a recommendation, that's fine. In terms of schools, so at the last public master plan meeting, there was so much feedback from the audience about making sure schools are reflected. It's such a cornerstone in this community, and it's not really a cornerstone of this plan. It's kind of stuffed in as a bullet afterthought in a way. So I don't know to what extent. I realize that there's a school committee, and maybe that a lot of that's in their purview, which is fine. But just to really think about what does that look, if we can put something in recommendations that make sure that for all the people that did move here for the school system and pay high taxes for it, that it really is a cornerstone of what we're doing, and we're not overtaxing. If we're going to put all this building in, you know, are we, what's the impact on schools, or what's the impact on numbers? Are we overtaxing the schools? Can we support what we're trying to do on the building side? And of course, those could be recommendations, but I just really wanted to emphasize for those who didn't go to the last master plan meeting that there was a great deal of feedback from the audience on making sure schools are adequately represented in the plan. So that's just my feedback there. Thanks.
Okay, so we heard the comments. We have our edits.
Based on the comment that was just made, you know, continue to support an excellent educational system. I just wonder, do we want to include, you know, mention facilities as part of that? I mean, that was, you know, a pretty big point by the town, not putting capital into the schools for quite a few years, and then having to pay the piper. So
Do people feel that excellent educational system includes the maintaining of the facilities, or we need to add a few words to this one to ensure that people know it does?
I think one does.
Okay. Jason? Oh, George, sorry.
To Carrie's point, I just wonder whether we want to separate education and make it a total separate goal.
It's one of the few goals that has its own economic stream, right? Set apart from a lot of these others, so it's kind of an odd duck in these goals.
Do you mean MSBA funding?
Well, town funding, state funding, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's my sort of disconnect with
Okay.
this whole thing, because if you're gonna do real capital improvements in the schools, you're probably gonna be doing,
State.
you're gonna have a state component. I don't know what the reimbursement rate is in Northborough, but for me, that's sort of something I think that's really hard for us to articulate in the master plan, because there is a separate school committee and there is a separate funding channel,
Right.
and that has a very specific process.
And what funding channel are we gonna,
I'm talking about the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
Right.
If you're gonna do
larger projects?
larger projects, right?
Yeah, so you're only talking the larger projects?
No, I just,
Smaller capital
it's not that I
projects.
don't support those, and it's not that I don't want to do those. I definitely want to do those. But I'm trying to understand kind of what it makes sense for us to articulate in the master plan in terms of the physical condition and, you know, expansion of the schools, because they are different than the assets that the town owns in terms of their capital funding. So it's really, I'm really asking a question here.
Right.
And I would assume, Susan, that there's a whole separate, it may not be called a master plan, but there's a whole separate comprehensive plan that the school department operates under.
We have a capital plan.
Right, I mean, there's definitely the capital plan, but I'm assuming that, it's part of a larger plan or part of,
Yeah, we have a strategic plan.
Okay.
Yes,
But I do-
my-
would just
that's
come in
my
with
thought
my
also that although I can understand where the community is feeding back to us about the importance of the schools, we understand that. But from the town's perspective, as we talked about, the schools, I don't say they're self-funding, but they're a separate entity that's kind of managed in coordination with the town. So the town master plan doesn't really focus on education, except as we talked about here, it's part of our public environment, and we can have some statements about it and some suggestions about what the town should be doing to support the schools. But to the extent that there's a feeling in the town that there needs to be a lot of activity or thought or change made to how we do public education, that's an issue for the superintendent and the school committee, separate from the town and the selectmen. So I understand the importance of education, but under the guise of the town master plan, education is, the town has less to do, I'm not phrasing this properly, but administratively, the town has less to do with education than everything else we're talking about here.
Jason?
I was going to, when it comes to education, the town has less authority about the details of the budget construction and everything, and it simply comes down to approval of the overall budget for the school component. As far as the school facilities are concerned, the buildings and everything like that, the work that's done on those is of such a scale that you cannot do them independently or separately from any other town public facility. And in fact, in our 6-year capital plan, the school buildings and major school capital purchases or renovations are components of that plan along with all the other town stuff. So for this bullet item here about the school system, I wouldn't think or expect that the buildings themselves need to be called out separately because they are part of the overall capital planning needs of the town, have to be factored into the tax base and the debt service that we can be paying and everything. So I wouldn't expect that component of education to necessarily be called out as a separate line item here when we already have the first bullet there that talks about public facilities and infrastructure.
And not that we're going to jump ahead, but if you look at some of the draft recommendations, it really does focus on those things that we do have some say in creating additional outdoor recreation space, plan for and fund projects related to their capital improvement. Like, we're a supportive role in this, but we value it, right? I mean, and that's why it has its own goal, that it's, we want to continue to support it, but understanding the constraints. Okay. All right, I'm going to move out to the audience. Anybody have anything else about the schools? I'm sorry, about the public facilities? Okay.
I move that we vote to accept these goals as changes or suggested.
Second.
Okay, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor? All right, okay, we're on to transportation. Last one. Okay, there was really nothing changed from our original work in the surveys and the groups. The only one was to work on transportation, and I would assume neighboring communities. Neighboring was added because neighbors to our east are not part of the Worcester's RTA. They're part of the Metro West RTA. So, and unless everybody only wants to go west to Worcester, we need to partner with our neighbors to the east. Anybody have any concerns or comments about this section? Okay. And that's the audience. Do you have any questions, comments, or concerns about the transportation goals of the community? Mark made a motion to.
Second.
Oh, there you go, second. No further discussion, all those in favor? All right, there you go, all right, thank you very much. All right. Okay, all right, well, all right,
charged
so,
up
I mean,
now.
we are right at 9 o'clock, but I'm going to ask if everybody would just indulge us for another like 10 minutes so that we can just talk about what the next steps are. Because we did not get to preliminary overview of the current draft recommendation to achieve these goals. But everybody can take them home and read Amy's comments, because she's really put a lot of work into the comments, and I think that Kathy did send them, if she has not already electronically, if that's easier for you. Put your own comments to it so that Jeffrey and Donnie can absorb it and compile it and bring it back to us.
We're going to give a time frame to this.
Yeah.
We need to,
Couple weeks? Yes, Norm, okay.
Where do these come from exactly? Who wrote these action steps? What we're calling them recommendations?
The action came from our consultants, go ahead.
The recommendations are a combination of.
Recommendations, I'm sorry. Stuff they did.
Are a combination of things that you guys have mentioned in your reporting and commenting on the baseline analysis and they come from the public, the comments. And as we had a discussion with the public, before the public forum, that conversation involved recommendations and idea generation, and then also consultants us.
But none of this is passing time.
No, I
It's just the way-
understand. I just wanted to
As
know.
opposed to starting with a blank slate, with way to get some stuff up.
Yeah, all right, that's
Right.
These
right,
can be changed
just
throughout
like, just like the goals, there was some, initial discussion, and then, obviously our consultants' experience, same thing with their recommendations.
So tonight, we were successful in locking in our vision statement, our overarching goals. Now we're going to work on the recommendations on how we get to those goals. Okay?
So you wanted a deadline, I think, for.
All right, so,
submitting
yeah, so just so I can tell you, our next meeting is January 3rd of next year. Believe it or not. Okay, so what,
And the focus of that meeting will be, another thing, to take all our comments, put them together, and to get to a point, maybe we can do this on January 3rd to approve the action plan.
Exciting idea.
there you go, okay, good.
I was just gonna throw out as an option, maybe having a couple of weeks to take a look at this and try to get it in, maybe just before Thanksgiving might be a good thing to
Right.
let everyone get something done, take a little break, Donnie and I can digest it and so forth, and follow up with the core committee as well.
Okay, so what is the week, so Thanksgiving's early, so it's the
So maybe we
22nd.
say the 16th.
Yeah, by
Friday
the comments by the 16th.
Which is the Friday before.
Yeah.
Okay, Friday the 16th, have your comments to Kathy. She will then forward them on to the consultants. And then we'll meet, so there was some discussion about possibly putting together some type of survey or to ask some pointed questions. And to be honest, I don't remember what those pointed questions were.
And if I might offer on that, I think once we get the feedback from the committee about some of the preliminary recommendations, here you talk that through, more of those targeted questions might become more obvious, it might be more than one or two or three of them. I think we can figure out as a committee how best to get that out and get people to react. I think the only thing I'd just like to offer, as you look through all the recommendations, just like what you did with the goals, I think all of these different words really do matter in terms of, should you do this? Do you have to do it? Should you explore versus make it mandatory? We can tweak all of those things to soften it or punch it up. I think the other part to keep in mind is how detailed do you get into recommendations, right? So it might be tempting to say, like, I need to have 2 feet of this and 5 feet of that, versus saying you need to set a framework for what the setback should be or what the parameters should be, for example. Think about how detailed you want to be. And the last thing I'd say is think about flexibility. So if this is a plan that's 10 to 15 years in duration, for example, what we think should be in here that might be really detailed might need to change 5 years from now or be flexible enough to accommodate different things in the future. So think about flexibility as you do this work.
All right, so to that point, since we're all lay people here making our recommendations, is it your recommendation that we should not, or is it really up to us as a committee or as a town to be that specific, but you're suggesting that we not This is not the zoning bylaws or our subdivision
Right,
bylaws.
So,
This is,
exactly, so
okay.
things like, this is not zoning, right? This might say, you should recommend exploring zoning that might achieve your goals. How you specifically do that, other entities will study later, for example. So try to be as specific as you can, but remember, if you put something in that's really specific, there might be really good reasons why you need to have more flexibility for this. So I just put that as an idea for you to think about and balance that, because I'm sure you're working as a committee as we continue to talk.
So, other than working on this through the 16th of November, Kathy, is there anything else that we need to do between now and January 3rd?
I just need you to approve minutes tonight. but that's-
Okay, all right, so the only other business was the September 6th minutes that were sent out, and people had a chance to look at them, if someone would be willing to recommend approving them.
So moved.
Okay, Rick has a motion. John second, all those in favor? Okay, so they pass, Kathy?
And then abstain.
Oh, and Jason abstained, okay. All right, so then, anybody have anything else pressing, questions? Norm?
I just had a question, pretty basic one. So, as part of this current 20-year plan that we're putting together, is there a section in this current plan that actually reviews what we planned on 20 years ago and see if we've been successful in some areas? Almost like an evaluation of our past performance? Is that part of this plan?
Probably the closest thing is the update to the baseline conditions. So when we're developing all of that, the committees are going to review that. That reflects some of the who you are today and what you've done. So by basis of having that in the plan, it says the things you've done today. Does it tie back literally line item by line item? No, but your updated profile shows you the things that you've done. So it's not as little as I think you're talking about. It does reflect.
Well, I wouldn't want a 50-page review of it, but I would like to see a 2-page review of what we were successful at and what we weren't as successful at. I mean, I took a skim, I skimmed through it, and the thing that's dropped out right away for me is we have 20 years ago we didn't have CPA funding. Because of CPA funding, a lot of this was done. Not everything, but a lot. And it's almost like I'd like to see a statement that said, our successes in the past 20 years was CPA funding, we did all of these wonderful things, plus, there's a lot of other things in there that popped up. I'm not, it just seems like a way to say.
Yeah, that's something, I can take a crack at that, because obviously, our consultants don't have that experience, with what we as a community have done, or the boards have done since '97. So, I can take a crack at that as to how we can then incorporate it.
That's a good point, Rob, because this is not a first time. This is the second, the next version of, or an updated edition of the master plan. So it would be nice to see that continuity.
That's how it used to get reviewed, so.
All right, so thank you. Okay, anything else? Otherwise, the motion to adjourn, someone?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.